In this third video on the digestive system, we're going to be looking at where macromolecules are digested. So we've studied these four categories of macromolecules: carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. And these are important building blocks for everything that we are. We need to get those building blocks from the foods that we eat. And so we're going to take a look at where each of these categories are digested as we travel through the digestive tract. So let's begin at the oral cavity. So the oral cavity, or the mouth, is where food is ingested. So I've colored this here in this yellow-green color, and it's also where mechanical digestion begins, as our tongue moves the food into place and our teeth break it up into smaller pieces. But there's also chemical digestion happening here in the oral cavity as well. Our salivary glands are going to produce saliva. Contained in that saliva is both water and an enzyme called salivary amylase. Salivary amylase is going to break down carbohydrate, or at least begin the breakdown of carbohydrates. So we have an orange star here, and that breakdown is going to continue as food travels down the esophagus, being pushed by those peristaltic waves, pushing the food down the esophagus to the stomach. That moisture from our saliva mixing with our food and being chewed up and moved around with our tongue, our moisture, the salivary amylase, and the food is going to combine into a roundish, wet, slippery ball that can be pushed down. That ball is called the bolus, and that bolus will travel down the esophagus to the stomach. In the stomach, we're going to have that mechanical digestion that we talked about, where the strong walls of the stomach are going to contract and mash up, mix that bolus with gastric juice. That is the liquid that's being created by the lining of the stomach. In this video, we're going to see that peristaltic wave as the muscles contract along the stomach. So this video is taken from the inside of a stomach. So as you can see, those muscular contractions are pretty strong. This is an empty stomach, but if there was food in there, those muscular contractions would be mashing up the food as it moved through the stomach as well. But also in the stomach, we're going to have chemical digestion happening. And this is because gastric juice produced by the stomach contains an enzyme called pepsin. And this pepsin is going to begin the breakdown of proteins. So we have a little star here at the stomach showing chemical digestion is going to occur here as well, and a P to represent that. This is where protein digestion is going to happen. Now, the gastric juice is being produced by parts of the lining of the stomach called gastric pits or gastric glands, and it's going to secrete this gastric juice when it mixes with the bolus, the food, and water. It's going to create a substance called acid chyme, and that acid chyme will leave the stomach and head over here to the duodenum of the small intestine. We'll talk more about that later. So let's look a little bit more closely at the stomach. Here's our stomach right here, the inside of it, and the lining here of the stomach is covered in these gastric pits or gastric glands, as they're sometimes called. And the gastric pits have lots of different types of cells, each producing a different product. So some cells are going to produce mucus. So that mucus is going to be really important to protect the lining of the stomach, and that's because of these other cells that are producing gastric acid or hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid is quite acidic and could cause damage to the lining of the stomach, hence the need for the mucus. And then there's a different type of cell that produces pepsinogen. Now, pepsinogen is an inactive protein, but when the pepsinogen mixes with the hydrochloric acid, the acid is going to change its three-dimensional shape and actually turn it into pepsin, the active enzyme that breaks down proteins. And all of that will be secreted out of here, out of these gastric pits, and into the stomach to allow for the chemical digestion of proteins. Now, most of the digestion is actually going to happen in the small intestine. We usually think of the stomach being where most of that digestion occurs, but really, the majority of it's happening in the small intestine. So far, we've just begun the digestion of carbohydrates and the digestion of proteins prior to this, but as the acid chyme leaves the stomach and enters the small intestine, this is where we're going to see the digestion of carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids all happening here in this first section of the small intestine, which is called the duodenum. We're going to take a look at the role that the gallbladder and the pancreas play in allowing for a lot of digestion to occur here in the duodenum of the small intestine. Now, let's talk about the mechanical digestion that occurs in the small intestine, particularly the mechanical digestion of fats and oils. So as the acid chyme leaves the stomach and heads here to the first section of the small intestine, the duodenum, it has all kinds of food molecules in it, but the ones that are going to be hardest for enzymes to attack are fats and oils, because fats and water don't mix. Maybe you've had the experience of, say, a salad dressing bottle where you have the oil that sits on top of the vinegar. Vinegar is mostly water. So you shake up the salad dressing bottle, and you can get the oil on the top to kind of break up into smaller droplets in here. But when you put the salad dressing bottle down, those droplets just combine back together again. And when that's happening, the enzymes have a hard time attacking all of these droplets here. So we need to keep those fat droplets separated. That's where bile comes in. Bile contains bile salts, and the bile salts, once you break this up, the bile salts will surround each little droplet here and prevent them from sticking to each other, combining and floating back to the surface again. That's the role of bile, is to emulsify fats, break them up into small droplets, and keep those small droplets separated. Now, there can be one challenge with those bile salts. Those bile salts have a tendency in some people to form, to come together as solids and create little stones known as gallstones. And those gallstones, as they pass through the bile duct, can create a lot of pain. So people who have a tendency to create gallstones and have trouble passing them may have their gallbladder removed. Now, most of the chemical digestion in the duodenum of the small intestine are due to the enzymes produced by the pancreas. So there's another duct that comes out of the pancreas, joins with the bile duct, and secretes pancreatic juice into the duodenum of the small intestine. The pancreatic juice contains a substance called bicarbonate. Now, that acid chyme that's coming from the stomach needs to be neutralized. In the small intestine, we can't have those very low pHs created by the hydrochloric acid. So the pancreas produces this substance, a basic substance called bicarbonate, that can neutralize those stomach acids. And that will allow the enzymes that are produced by the pancreas to function, because they can't function at very low pHs. And so there are a whole host of enzymes that are coming out of the pancreas. There are amylases. Pancreatic amylase will digest carbohydrates. There are enzymes called trypsin and chymotrypsin that will digest proteins as well as other proteases. There are lipases that digest lipids and nucleases that digest nucleic acids, all being produced by the pancreas, and they're going to complete the digestion of our food molecules in the small intestine.